So welcome to the Fundamentals of Sponsored Projects at CSU series. This hour we feature award types and setups. I am Shannon Irie, your moderator for the session. I am one of the training and information coordinators here at the Office of Sponsored Programs. We also made interactive worksheets for each session that you can access on the OSP training website on the fundamentals page. And again, those are downloadable on our website. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today, Chris and Kat.
Good morning. This is my first fundamentals presentation, so I'm counting on you guys to let me know if you can't hear me, if I'm talking too fast, if I'm gesturing too much. I am the ERA Systems Officer in the Office of Sponsored Programs, but I have been working at CSU in OSP for 17 years now in a variety of roles. And I started as an admin assistant processing awards, trying to figure out what was coming in, and moved over to being an RA, working with proposals and amendments. And then I started working with systems and training on our KR award system and working with our award setup team. So I might not do all the things with awards, but I do have a broad range of knowledge that I am hoping to share with you today.
Hi, I'm Catherine O'Hare. I am a training and information coordinator with the Office of Sponsored Programs. I fell into research administration about 14 years ago and just stuck around and kept growing. And this is one of the areas that I started in and spent a lot of years doing setup and negotiation, reviewing awards that had just come in. So that's why I'm here to share my experience today. We are going to have this, we're going to be at this one part of the life cycle. We are starting the post-award stage, but kind of leaving pre-award. It's that bridge, right? So we received the award receipt. What does that look like? We'll discuss that today. And what are those negotiation aspects that come up and may delay or give us some time at setup to get all of our ducks in a row. Things that happen at this stage. We're going to care about the award mechanisms, what regulations are in place. Last week we had our governing regulations session, so we're not going to go too much into that today, but it plays a part in understanding what's happening at setup and acceptance. We have all these different types of agreements that can happen, even non-financials that we will touch on. We have money coming from different sponsors, and all these things to factor in. And then some financial aspects, like do you have a split account, or what needs to happen to the budget now that things have changed. So these are our factors that we'll cover today. Okay, in the chat, let's do grant first. So find the chat, and we're going to do a chat bomb, okay? So write one characteristic that you think of when you hear the word grant. Okay, and I'm going to say 3, 2, 1, go. And then you're going to hit it, okay?
Yeah, so don't hit the send until Kat says send. You can get your...
So I can be overwhelmed with all of them at once. Okay, what characteristic do you think of when you hear grant? 3, 2, 1, send. Research, flexible, federal, unrestricted funds, flexible, money. Just money is coming in. That's what happens. Yes, donors. Grant is a very generic word, right? It's not just in our sponsored program realm. We also have it outside. It's one of our external sponsors. It's a mechanism that's used. Some of these things are on our table. So Shannon, you can reveal what's in grant for us. The majority of our awards that we receive at CSU do fall into this grant category. You're having a general goal or knowledge, wider aims to pursue. Yes, it outlines sponsor guidelines. It has a lot of flexibility, as Sarah pointed out. Little sponsor oversight in this one. Uniform guidance. No one caught that one. So think about that for when we get to the next category. So uniform guidance plays a role, especially in our federal grantors. Cost reimbursable. We'll see that word later and discuss what does cost reimbursable mean. Okay. Start putting your word in for cooperative agreement. Do you know what a cooperative agreement is? We see less of them. And then I'm going to say 3, 2, 1, go. sponsor participation, sponsor involvement, significant sponsor involvement. Wow, you guys all have very similar thoughts here. Multi-institutions, like it. Collaboration, a question mark. Great. So maybe no experience with the cooperative agreements yet. Umbrella. That's an interesting one, Aaron. Thank you. I would like to hear your thoughts more on that one. Let's see it, Shannon. What's in cooperative agreements? Very similar to a grant in some ways, but it does have that substantial sponsor involvement, frequently updating and communicating with all the parties, with other institutions involved, other partners. Maybe that's the umbrella you're talking about, like all those reaching out to each other and being under the same agreement. And typically, if it's in our federal world, it's going to be under uniform guidance, but it may not apply to the same expanded authorities and stuff that we'll discuss more in the award management sessions. So you've got to be careful about checking for that. Okay, if I miss anything, Chris or Shannon, please feel free to shout it out, or any thoughts you have on working with these. Okay, let's do contract in the chat. What is your word you think of when you hear contract? All right, 3, 2, 1, bomb. Forgot that part. Deliverables, fixed price, restrictive, PO, purchasing, deliverable, FAR, strict. Yes, FAR stands for Federal Acquisition Regulations. Thank you, Gift. T's and C's, more sponsor involvement, governed by FAR, purchase of goods and services. There's a good key one. Restrictive procurement. Yep, there was our scramble word we did for warm up. Procure. Let's see it, Shannon. You guys are getting them. You're getting all the categories. What was our guidance? FAR. What was the restrictions? More restrictive. What is the aim for it? Procuring goods or services. Oh yeah, more strict in if we have deviations in our terms and conditions. Like terms and conditions are going to be on all of these sponsored agreements. You're not going to have terms and conditions maybe in the gift world, but in all these you're going to have terms and conditions, but the contract ones are definitely have a strictness to them that cooperative agreement and grant do not. Yeah, you might need more prior approvals from the sponsor for a modification to request an amendment. And I think someone got fixed price, right? Wasn't that in the list? It could be cost reimbursable, but this is where we start saying fixed price. Yep, Christy got that one. Good job, everyone. Last one, subaward. Put your word in the chat and I will count it down. We talked a little bit about subawards in the budgeting part 2 session. So we're not going to cover it too much today, but we brought it in because it is an award mechanism. We're thinking about the outgoing factor, not subawards incoming, because we treat those mostly as whatever their instrument was. Was it a grant? Was it a cooperative agreement from another institute? But this is focusing on outgoing subaward relationships. Okay, 3, 2, 1, bomb it. Was the extra paperwork from the last one? Okay, research, flow through. CSU is not the prime. Collaboration, decision making. Yeah, very good. Okay, collaboration we also saw in cooperative agreement. Flow through, that idea of, yeah, I mentioned passing from one entity to the other. Shannon, let's see. In our side-by-side comparison, it's made from one organization to another, the prime being the pass-through entity, PTE. They receive an agreement, they negotiate and accept, and then they pass down, or as you all pointed, or a lot of you pointed out, flow down appropriate terms and conditions to their subrecipient. We can use all these different lingos, subaward, subcontract, do you call it a subgrant? They're just subs. It's a big term. And so we're using generally subaward as our term today. I mentioned that part about incoming versus outgoing.
I just would point out that this is one of the sticking points that's the hardest to train on, because an incoming document says subaward, but what is it really? If we at CSU are receiving it, it's one of the other types. Generally, as Kat mentioned, when we send a thing out, we are issuing an outgoing subaward. That could be a grant, contract, or cooperative agreement to our subrecipient. So I guess what I wanted to get out of this session is raising awareness that the name of the thing doesn't always match what the thing is. And we're trying to give you a framework of qualities or attributes to try to understand what you're looking at. Don't get so fixated on what the thing is named at the top of the document or what somebody calls it. Again, we also work with a lot of people who don't work across all the agreement types, and they might call everything a subcontract, even though it's really not, because that's their
Right.
world.
When I was in a department, my PI would sometimes say, no, my subaward with Duke. And I'd be confused. Like, we don't have and it was because they were talking about the one that came to us that we are the subaward on. So yeah, knowing what those different terms are in the language, how they work together, or what to look out for if you get a contract that came in and you're like, okay, what do I need to consider as we're reviewing this and going to accept it on behalf of the university? Thank you, Chris, for remembering that aspect. Okay, Chris is going to talk about the wild cards that we are seeing more and more.
So when we talk, when we talk about award types, this is another place where what is an award? It's a certain thing to one person working in sponsored programs. A person who does a lot of material transfer agreements might call it the same award or my agreement, right? So knowing what space you're operating in also is important. A non-financial agreement generally means there's no transfer of money involved. A material transfer agreement is materials incoming and outgoing. The other types that we work with, there's so many types. These are probably the four most common. Non-disclosure, it can happen even before we're even thinking about a proposal. So it doesn't necessarily need to be tied to a proposal, although that often does end up getting tied to a project. Data use is often tied to an agreement of some type, a funded agreement of some type. And MOUs, we get a lot of questions on this, like, what does that even mean? It's several parties agree to work together. And I've worked on proposals where there was a requirement for us to say we have this MOU with all of our partners, even before we submitted the proposal. For these types, we ask that you contact your OSP Senior Research Administrator or our contract officer, Adam Donzi. And we've got forms for these now or web forms. We've always had forms, web forms that you can have filled out and submitted to get the process started. So this place on our OSP website is where you'd find those initiation points for the form and also some additional information. But again, if you have questions, reach out to your OSP SRA. So we talk about numbers and measuring ourselves and metrics a lot. These are a couple of screenshots, the past 4 years, I think, 2019 to 2023. You can measure different ways. You can measure by dollars. You can measure by numbers. No one number tells the whole story. So number of transactions, things that we processed, number of incoming new awards, modifications. Award obligations is how much money was involved. And this is a number that we see a lot, especially in our Vice President for Research summary of the year, right? You can see some spikes. I can tell you that 2020 and 2021, we did spike our activity quite a bit, a lot of COVID opportunities, right? We were doing a lot of work in that space. Those opportunities dropped off in 2022, which means the numbers kind of drop off. But now we are seeing increasing numbers, especially with changes, modifications to existing awards. This is another graphic. This is from the VPR newsletter. So this shows you the different buckets that we get funding from. We are primarily in the sponsored projects area, funded by the federal government. Grants, contracts, cooperative agreements from federal sponsors. I see a question, the new president's goal for research dollars. I would say I don't get fixated on goals for research dollars because a $5,000 award can take twice as much time as a $5 million award, right? So for me, it's not the dollar amount, it's how many transactions are we processing? How many new awards are we bringing in? This again shows that our total funding, award funding for the last year was almost 500 million.
I was just going to say, I think that we saw projections for next year we're going to be well over 500 million and these are 500 million of expenditures. So that's what this number is about. and what is your measure of transactions? What is your measure of transactions at CSU?
So award transactions is a new award coming in, a new notice of award, or a modification to an existing award, an amendment, modification that has some impact on how we manage the award. That's what we're counting in number of transactions.
And this number is the amount that we've actually spent. So,
yes,
and we haven't heard that there's any new goals for, that was under the previous president that we had, and it was 500 million. So I think we've already hit that, and we're going to exceed that. So I haven't heard that there's a new goal set.
On this, we were also going to talk about what kind of bringing together the idea we just did about award types with what are the sponsors that we have. So in that federal bucket, we can have grants, contracts, cooperative agreements. And then we see those subawards in higher ed. That's that whole section. And then, well, it could be something else, but mostly subawards in that section. Nonprofit is more of a mixed bag where you can see grants. You're not going to see cooperative agreements. You can see a contract. In the other government section, that's our labs, right? City, county, state funding, purchase orders from other state agencies. And so those are often called contracts in that section, but they will definitely look a little different because it's not as broad as our federal sponsoring agencies. And then industry also typically utilizes contracts. So,
and I will say, I developed a lot of notes on this and I went right past them because I got really caught up in the questions. I'm really sorry. So I want to go back to a few people in the chat bomb about grants. We're talking about donors. We do see nonprofit grant opportunities or competitions, and those are sponsored project grants. So again, the name of the thing isn't necessarily what the thing is. So keep that in mind, especially as you're working across other types of sponsors like nonprofits, foundations, institutes. They may call it a thing and mean something different than we mean.
Right. A foundation grant may not be as straightforward, as easy to understand as like an NSF grant, because we see so many NSF ones, it's easier to predict and know what we're dealing with versus a grant from a foundation could throw in some more restrictive terms that would be more attuned to like a contract style relationship. We love metrics, Chris and I, but we did them. We can move on now.
I just wanted to mention that the new metrics for, and not new, but it's for 2023 have been added to the website. I did put the link in there for the research analytics. So there is some more information in there for 2023 now, which has just been added. So go take a look at it, see what you think.
Okay, so this is a screenshot of a basic notice of award. And this notice of award concept, that's our trigger to start OSP processes, intake, negotiation, acceptance, and then down the road to award setup. There's a difference between this official notice of award, and often our PIs will get some kind of communication from their sponsor, the sponsor that we submitted to, saying, we're going to fund you. That's not a notice of award. That's like an intent to fund. There are some sponsors like NIH that use funding criteria to tell you you are in a group that might get funded, right? That's also not a notice of award. We have situations where these documents, actual notices of award though, are sent only to the PIs and not to OSP. Some of this happens based on how the proposal was submitted. We do work with sponsors that they don't work with central offices, they work with the researchers, and if the proposal comes from the researcher, the award is sent to the researcher. But that's a sponsored program, so that needs to be forwarded to your OSP team. And loop OSP into communication back and forth too. Even with an intent to fund, that helps us as well to know that there is maybe an award coming. There are also sponsors that just send a check in an envelope, often with very little identifying information, and we have to figure out what it actually is funding. They can also send those checks directly to the department. We've had that happen. So if it looks like a sponsored project, please loop in OSP. This can be really hard to in that space where is it a gift or is it a grant, especially with the institution or institutes or other nonprofit sponsors that don't have structured competitive opportunities. We do work with foundation relations to figure some of this out, but if you keep OSP in the loop, we can help you manage it. And Jenny is pointing out, yeah, in chat. So if we've actually submitted a proposal, having that proposal title as a way to match, making sure that, again, if you're on the PI or department side, and this is a situation where you have to submit directly, making sure that the title is the same as we have in our system, or we can edit our system, the proposal title, to make sure it matches whatever the final title was determined to be. So we'd like those to be consistent. So your help with that is deeply appreciated. So after this, we're going to ask you to go to your handout, and there is a notice of award in there that is going to be the basis of the engagement activity that Kat is going to handle next.
But yeah, it's just page 4 of your worksheet.
And I guess what I would point out is they don't all look the same. So this notice of award from NSF comes in an email format. It doesn't always look this pretty. It's got some of our basic indicators, and the email scrolls and scrolls. So that's one way of doing it. Not everybody does it the same.
Yeah, you all are going to look at one that's from one of our other top sponsors, and you're going to pull out things that try to use your highlight, your Adobe highlight. Call out what you think is important data points that we need as we are accepting and setting up. So with that mindset, you have 3 minutes. Okay.
I don't know about the rest of you, but 3 minutes is a long time.
Not when you're scrolling Instagram, but yes, when you're doing a presentation.
People can let us know in the chat if they are done reading through a document. Are you reading through it, Shannon? I'm reading it.
Yeah.
That's why it's long for you.
Okay, time's up.
Okay. Can I get some raised hands? Anyone want to tell me what they found? Yay, Christy. Knock something off our minute to win it board.
Recently have discovered this MIRA requirement on NIHs. It's on page 5. That's a new requirement that I've never seen before, but it's in your award here.
Mhm.
It requires the PI to devote at least 51% of his or her research effort on this project.
Yeah, I don't have that one as a specific bubble, but it qualifies for specific award terms and conditions. So Shannon's gonna,
Special?
yep,
Terms and
special
conditions?
terms and conditions. Great. That section does highlight a lot for us. Anything that is very specific to this program or this award. Salary caps is in that section. This is a few years old, so this hopefully, or the links point to what is the newer mirror, but the mirror was just updated. So if you're watching this recording a year from now, make sure you're looking at the most recent mirror.
And by the way, some of these are very basic. I'm going to give a hint.
Hi, yeah, I can see that this was identified specifically as a grant. So we know the
Okay.
award type.
Cool. Great.
It
We have an
is.
award type in the chat.
Yeah, in the chat, we've got budget period.
And project period. So something, let's see, what page was that on? On page 1. You will all see in line 19, we have budget period starts on February 1st, 2022 and ends February 31st, 2023. That's only a year, right? Versus below on line 26, we have a project period, which is basically the anticipated time. It could be given to us, it could not be. In the contract world, that's definitely not a given. So if you, or then this goes all the way through 2022 to 2027. So we do call those out in our system as different dates. That was a good one. Carry over without prior approval. Yes, in the NIH awards, there's a little hint for you for another item. Carry over is outlined. Is it restricted or is it not? Carry over is whether you can move money, remaining money from year 1 into year 2, into year 3, into year 4. And sometimes NIH branches don't allow it, or different programs. We have an award number. Yes, that is very important. It's an important identifier for us for our system in Quali. In emails, when you're emailing with your OSP team, you need to have some kind of identifier in there so everyone's talking about the same award. That's a helpful tool. And we need that when we're reporting back to the sponsor or communicating with them so they know we're on the right record or on the same record. Program official. Okay, so sponsor contacts might be the bubble that we check off. So who is our administrative contact, the authorized official versus the program official? Or do we have a technical contact? Do we have a admin contact? Those are very helpful things. Could we explain SNAP? So SNAP is related, that is a good thing to call out. That's related to reporting and streamlined non-competitive award procedures. Right, so then, is that on one of the last pages? This grant is subject to this SNAP. Okay, so it has links that we go out to know what does that mean for our reporting procedures. I don't think we call it out at setup, but it's good to know for the award management lifecycle.
We do actually have an indicator. It's not been as consistently used as I would like to see, but yes, when it does apply, we do have an indicator.
I messed up.
Great.
One
Thank
of
you,
them was
Chris.
wrong. I just gave you guys an answer.
Which one?
Title. Sorry.
Title. Yes, the title is very important, as Jenny pointed out earlier. We need to know the title, make sure the words are right, because that's going to be what's published, right? This is going to stick with them the rest of their life. We need a title. Okay, guys, we have a lot of bubbles left. Throw some things
I'm
out there
gonna
in the
give
chat.
Carry
Yep.
over and prior approval. I'm going to do sponsor guidance on that one.
Okay, great. Monies, Liza. Okay, I think there are 2 different money bubbles. So tell me what are the funding items that we need? Current period versus annual amount for each 5 years. Yes, that's what I'm getting at. So on page 1, we have outlined what's coming to us, what is obligated at this point. So obligated amount versus we have a full 5-year table broken out on this award in page 3. And so that's what you can anticipate for each year. It's anticipated funding. We don't have it in hand. Chris, you have a thought there?
Yeah, this has also been a point of conversation over 17 years, why we don't enter the entire amount in our award system. And it's because we can only capture what has actually been obligated. So that's for incremental funding situations, we add the funding as we receive it. We do have an indicator in the system that says we expect this total amount, but that's not a guarantee, right? With our federal awards, over the past, I don't know, 15 years, we've had several rounds of reduced funding because of continuation spending, where NIH just reduces everything by 10%. We've had situations where a project is ended before we expected, and so funding stops, right? So a notice of award that says we expect to give you this much is not a guarantee of that much. What they say we've got obligated means that is what we can spend against.
Well said. Assistance listing number popped up. I don't know if I put that on our top board, but yes, that is used for reporting down the line. It's put in our system at pre-award at the proposal stage. So it continues on, I believe, right, Chris? Or if we have it at proposal, we put input there. Okay, what else? Process date. Okay, so when it came to us, when it was made official. Okay, I don't know if I have that on the board, but it is good to know. Annual period versus, yep, we got that one. And cost share. Was there cost share on this one?
I would put that with sponsored guidance possibly, or the approved budget.
There was federal
Somewhere.
share. I didn't.
Nope, there's no cost share.
There's
So
no cost share on this
what
one.
should we start revealing some of these?
Yeah,
we didn't
link to
get?
standard terms applies to federal and federal flow through funding for grants agreements and cooperative agreements. Okay. Yeah, what are the ones remaining, Shannon? Top
Well,
left?
when I said
Who are we
basic,
getting the
Sponsor. Who's
money
our sponsor?
from?
Yeah.
when I
And it's
said
not just-
basic, I meant basic.
It's not just NIH. So NIH has a lot of branches, right? Or DHHS, Department of Health and Human Services. This one is what? Someone find it on page 1. The specific branch that's sending us money.
So then another basic one we had is who is the recipient?
Right. So this matters because it's not coming directly to the PI. It's not being awarded to the PI. It's being awarded to the institution. In this case, Colorado State University. So that matters because if we have any legal things that happen, who's signing off on it? Colorado State is an authorized representative. If it goes to transfer, we have to figure out, can it stay with the university or does it really need to stay with the PI? What else?
Okay, we've got, does it require a signature?
Yeah, anyone?
For
Do you see
acceptance.
anything about signature? Project director. So our project director, our PI is Cam Duram. Oh, then I can't remember if our authorizer official was who submitted it. Acknowledged by recipient when funds are drawn down. Nice. There it is. This one is accepted by drawdown. So that relates later on. This one is not something that we have to sign off on versus a subaward that we have incoming to us. So a grant from another institution of higher ed, we would actually have to sign off on. Contracts actually have to sign off on, electronic signature. And the last one, payment type. Do we see what it is? This is something we need to put in.
Sorry,
Yeah, go
just to
ahead.
clarify, Kat and Shannon, that recipient information in the blue column of an NIH, that number 8 should be a CSU person.
Okay.
It should be a signing official
The person who submitted.
in OSP. Yeah.
Okay. I was
I'd have
moving
to
too
go and
fast.
compare. Again, different sponsors pick up the information we submit different ways. Like NIH has a standard 424 and we put all kinds of contact information on it. What we put in block 5 may be different than what we put in block 19, and different sponsors pick it up differently. So I would need to compare, but that should be the person who submitted the proposal, who is an AOR, but we also sometimes need to manage contacts differently and make sure that the SRA gets assigned to the award instead as the authorized official, because that's the person who can commit CSU to terms and conditions, for example.
Great. Since we're talking about terms and conditions, You guys get points. What was it? 5, 10, 15 points. Yay! Good job,
Okay.
everyone. Let's dig down. Terms and conditions. Those were like the details that we have to start looking at, make sure things align from what we proposed to what we received, what was expected. We talked about the notice of award, a NOA. Now we're looking at specifically terms and conditions, or as you all called out in the chat, T's and C's. How can we accept them? Can we move on to setup?
So I wasn't in your governing regulations session, but I do understand that this is something that you did cover. This is just basically a reminder. There are different layers and levels of what applies. So this graphic illustrates our federal awards. So for non-federal awards, you might start in a different place. But anyway, so there's this underlying layer of federal awards that are federal regulations that apply depending on the mechanism. If it's a grant, one set. If it's a contract, FAR. The sponsor might build on that and have their own agency terms and conditions. There's a NASA specific term that's called out in their awards. We can have links to a website for a specific agency that would tell you what applies to that award. The award document itself might have even more restrictive terms and conditions, carryover, or when we apply to specific programs, the difference between applying to an R35 as opposed to an R01, right, might affect what conditions we look at in the award. And then institutional policies, which are not called out on the award document, but CSU does have a significant set of guidance and regulations that apply to sponsored funding that have to be followed. As with any questions about allowability, can we do this? You need to work with your OSP team, and again, order of precedence. The most restrictive thing is what we're looking for, right? I think we can go on to the next one unless anybody has any questions about that pyramid of precedence.
Okay, so we're going to think about, or keep that in your mind, as we're going to look at some what are the common T's and C's that we see and sometimes call out in our system. And then some of the things that are possibly things we need to negotiate. So these ones aren't as negotiated. They're things that we like to see, we may utilize, we like to know that it's available in our award management. So thinking for the future. Budget deviation. Can we move things around on the budget? Is there a specific percentage that we have to adhere to? With our grants, we're given, if it's under uniform guidance, you're given a certain amount of deviation authority. Versus in your contracts, you may have something that says there is no authority, no deviation amount. So you always need prior approval for that instance. Okay, one of the most common prior approvals that we utilize is a no cost extension, an NCE. So we like to see if that's going to be in the award. Is there an option to do extensions? Is there not? Do we have the opportunity to use our, if we're under expanded authorities, an automatic, quote unquote, automatic first NCE, right? Even though it's automatic, it doesn't mean you just declare it out loud. You still have to go through all the authorized gates, right? So the PI needs to get the necessary information to their admin team, and OSP submits as the authorized representative for these things that qualify for prior approvals. But we want to know, is there an opportunity for an extension? Is there anything that we need to flag about change in personnel? That typically does require prior approval, but it's a common T&C that we see. That the sponsor wants to know if we're taking a key person and changing them, not a GRA or an hourly person, but a key personnel. Add in removing a subrecipient. We see this off and on, where some sponsors want more information, some let you manage the relationships yourself if you have already approved subrecipients. So make sure, does your award say if you can add in a new subrecipient? If it doesn't, go request prior approval. Carryover of funds, as we saw in our notice of award, the NIH one said it was automatic in this time. If it wasn't, that really matters for setup, that we need to set up something so the accounts can't commingle, or that funds are kept separate in some way. Carryover of funds, are we managing to what the sponsor is expecting? And it's not just NIH that does this. I've also had like foundation sponsors that said we can only carry over 5,000 between years. So if we had 10,000 left at the end of the year, we either needed to request a no-cost extension for that period or leave 5,000, send it back to the sponsor, and only send 5,000 on to the next year. So if you have carryover, it's not just federal. Make sure that you're reading your award and catching that one. And then lastly, the one we're going to call out is travel. Is there any restriction on travel? Do we have to, even though it's been approved in the budget, do we have to tell the sponsor again that we're traveling? Or do we only have to tell them if it's foreign travel? And then we also have our institutional travel policy. So make sure that you're adhering to that, and whatever your department policy is for utilizing the travel desk. There's a question. Is RPS the best place to see an award T&Cs? RPS being, we're using an acronym.
Research project status, and Liza is psychic. So we have this website where we collect information from multiple systems to display, especially for our department research administrators, in an easy to access way. Can you see most of what's going on with an award? So I'm going to say yes, but we have a standard set of defined terms in our award system. They're coded by number. If we see something in an award that we need to call out that affects management, yes, we're trying to do that as consistently as possible. There are things that are in an award document that don't really match up one-to-one with some of our system conditions. We might call that out in a comment that appears in the comment section of RPS. For things like reporting, we're trying to do our best to capture the highest level of requirements. We are primarily concerned with the final technical, the final financial, a final invoice. We've got some indicators for reports and some indicators for terms, again, called out in comments. So look in RPS, but also go through your award. I can't say it often enough. The more eyes we've got on the award, the more understanding we have of the award itself from multiple perspectives. So, and if you see something in RPS that it's like, what does this even mean? Contact us and we can talk about that. I know that we don't do this 100%, but we can, I guess I should say, meet to discuss an award. Your OSP team can meet with you if you have all these questions about an award. And for Liza, so it is part of our process at the end of the negotiation that we do, which we apply to all awards. It's basically our award intake process, regardless of what we're doing with it. At the end, we do send a copy of the award to a named fiscal officer and the PI. Again, fiscal officer contacts change. Sometimes we don't get it right the first time. We try to make sure that our departments do have copies of all the relevant award documents.
I was also going to mention that I did put the link from our AAR page to the RPS system. It can also be accessed from my RAM. Both of those are behind a firewall, and so you have to be, if you're off campus or if you are joining us and you're not part of CSU, you won't be able to see RPS, but you would have to be on our VPN.
And the other thing about AAR is it requires the VPN. My RAM does not. My RAM requires sign-in, but not
yes.
VPN. Yeah.
But they're behind. You can't just go to it. You have to be actually signed into something.
We are here for the questions, Liza.
That is a good point, though. The award is going to be the main source and always the most accurate. Make sure you have the most updated award. If any modifications have come through, it's a whole package. And we don't want to make too many redundancies, but we want to make sure information is available. If you have a new award and you have a PI that's very new, or a research team that's new to sponsor projects, it might be a great opportunity to do a meet. Schedule a time for all the key stakeholders, like your OSP team, your department admin, and the team that's listed on the award, to say, like, what do we expect here? Anything that is of concern, especially, I don't know, yeah, at the beginning of the award, get those communication lines open. Planning ahead. Okay. Some things that OSP looks for when we're preparing to accept and move on with setting up this award. Anything that is possibly cautious. That's what these are. Don't jump in and swim. Make sure you read the terms first, right? Okay, and something to note, these can be possibly time consuming. They can keep us just a little bit longer before we get to that setup gate and pass on everything. It can be several rounds of communication between the sponsor and us when negotiation is involved. And your OSP team has specific language that they try to do to protect the university. So let's look at what those are. One that comes up is intellectual property. IP is very important right now, right, with our data age. So who owns the results, who owns the deliverables, and who's responsible for them? With that data rights aspect related to IP, what can we do with the information that's collected? How is it being shared and now stored, right, with data management? Are you using protected information? And then is there ownership involved? As I'm talking about data rights, this relates to our publications and confidentiality. Who is allowed to publish? And what information can be published openly versus what needs to be kept confidential? Those are things that might be outlined in the award. And we want to make sure that it's agreeable to the university, but also agreeable to the team, the sponsor project team that's going to be doing the work and wanting to publish. So if anything, you see anything in your award that seems unacceptable or too restrictive for you, call it out. Let your OSP team know. Okay, moving on to export compliance. We have some sponsors that may specifically call out to not work with a foreign entity. It could be related to that time period. Maybe there's a restriction with a certain country, or a certification saying that we will not contract with that entity. So if you have any export restrictions like that, or if it involves travel related to export, so making sure that you are protected when you're in travel status, those are things that our university also does. So those should be pretty consistent and work together. But if it's something that is more restrictive than we're expected, we might go to negotiate. Liabilities and warranties. So who is responsible if things go wrong? And what guarantees that the performer does the performance, right? So that if we're going to do the deliverable, how are we delivering it, and what happens if it doesn't? So this happens more in our contract world, where we have cure terms, we have termination options. There may be termination terms that aren't as flexible to working with an institute of higher ed. So we would probably want something that gives us an opportunity to correct things or cure things. We might want a time frame, or we want, sometimes a contract may say only one party can terminate. We want availability for both parties to terminate maybe, and that there has to be reason behind it. So we want to make sure that termination clauses that come up are acceptable for us being an institute of higher ed. Related to that, we have governing law. So if something goes wrong and we have to go to litigation or something, what are the foundations for that? Whose state law is incorporated? Is it the sponsor and where they're from, or is it where we are, the recipient? Can we accept if they're passing down anything from their state law? Do we have to negotiate that out, or do we have to give an exception letter or an acknowledgement to agree with the sponsor on a different governing law there? And then the last one we're going to call out is indemnification. This is like they want to be held harmless kind of term. It's thought of that sometimes. So who is held responsible if accidents occur during the work under the sponsored project? We have language that's acceptable, and we have language that is too restrictive for us. So we want to make sure that we call that out early on and get it okay for CSU that we are protected also. Bottom line, if you have a contract or agreement that you're struggling to understand and it seems very hefty or extra restrictive, we want to make sure that we're holding compliant to the agreement and representing our university well. So meet with your team, discuss it, call it out early. Get your team together, read the solicitation, the terms, and the award. All of them work together. It's a whole package. Who makes contact with sponsors about publications, export, etc.? Is this the PI or sponsor technical contact? Yeah, so if we need to negotiate, the PI should not be negotiating on behalf of the university. Our authorized organizational representatives are going to do that. So we'll get to that in a second.
And I just want to acknowledge to Christy's question, the PI is often talking to their counterpart. especially with industry, right? They have a relationship, and we're not trying to override or subsume that relationship, right? We're saying that on behalf of the institution, we have a duty of care to make sure that we are protecting the entire institution. So we need to be involved in any kinds of conversations about what applies to the relationship between the two entities. Does that help, Christy, or did I use? I just feel like sometimes we think, oh yeah, the PI is talking about that, and that's okay. We don't really call out what's not very clearly sometimes. Yeah, so there's an institutional component to everything that we're talking about that comes up in these next few slides about authorized organizational representatives.
I think sometimes there's also what Christy's also talking about is that OSP doesn't have to be involved if you're just talking about, hey, we're going to be publishing this all together and we're going to go to this journal. What we're talking about here is a cautious T&C that possibly restricts publications or has other rules surrounding whether or not we can do that. So they can be talking to their technical counterparts at the other place about where they're going to publish and how, and those kind of things, and working together on publications or conference papers or things of that nature. But we're talking about restrictions on those type of things.
Give us our word, Shannon. We have another word scramble. Who's going to get it this time? And us thinking about authorized organizational representatives, accepting our award. And we bumped up. This is an average rating versus you all accomplished 3 easy scrambles at the beginning.
And I'm the one who wrote the hint. I think it's funny.
Oh yeah?
So I'm gonna give the hint because it's funny. And this is Chris's. Penmanship used to matter.
Yeah, that's not as obvious as the one Shannon.
No, it is not.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. We got it.
It is signature. Why does signature matter, Chris?
Signature matters because these are institutional relationships. Every institution does this a little bit differently. So I'm speaking from the perspective of CSU and having been in OSP for 17 years. So we have delegated signature authority to different groups and individuals on campus based on their role. For sponsored projects, your authorized representatives, your authorized organizational representatives are your OSP senior research administrators and contract officers and the directors in a pinch. They can sign. This is delegated from like the system level on down through policy. And there's a very extensive policy document we can send you to see all the different kinds of signature authorities. One of the key points about sponsored programs is that we don't want PIs and departments to get caught up in the negotiation net. We should be representing all of you as OSP in this discussion with the source of the funding, the sponsor. And again, I think it's like maybe 90-10. Almost all kinds of this funding are coming to the institution for the institution's use with a person identified as the principal investigator or project director, that person that works for CSU, right? We all work for CSU. It's the PI's project, but it's the institution's responsibility and obligation to complete the project, to make sure that the project is complete. I guess I should say the PI has to do the work of the project, but we have to do all the admin, all the technical part together. It's a collaboration. So that's why the award documents come to us. We review them, we negotiate them. We will discuss with the PI and the department if there are problematic terms. Again, the more people that put eyes on this award, the better. But what we don't want is a PI taking off with a document and signing it and obligating the institution to something we can't accept, right? So PI should not be negotiating. But we need to know if there's something in the award that's concerning to you that might not trigger for us. And the example that came up when we were discussing examples is a reporting term that the sponsor wanted a report every 3 months. Like, that's a lot. We should try to negotiate that out. So there may be situations, I'm thinking MTAs that I used to work with required a PI countersignature, like some kind of acknowledgement of the PI's responsibility for this material transfer agreement. And obviously a non-disclosure agreement applies to a person in a project. There might be a countersignature required for that. But the official representative of the institution for sponsored project is the Office of Sponsored Programs. We do have situations where, again, fellowships, we can talk about fellowships all day and contracts all day, but there are different kinds of fellowships, and some are institutionally supported and some are made directly to the individual. So if the individual has to apply and the individual has to be accountable for the funding and gets the check, that's not something that would run through OSP normally. And I'm always going to say normally or usually, because nothing is ever 100% in this world. If you have questions, ask, don't just assume. But always keep OSP in the loop with regard to any kind of sponsored project. I guess that's the point I want to make. Anything else, you guys, that I missed?
In the chat, I put the commonly requested information link on our website, and on there is a list of people who can be authorized representatives for the university. So take a look at that.
There were times when I was working at non-federal funds, like in arts and sciences, where fellowships would be made directly to the person. And so you have to assess, is it really to the person or is the university involved? So who should be signing that one? Sometimes there are waivers, like if you're going into the field. So I had someone that was doing owl watching in Chautauqua because they come and do their annual nesting there. And so they had to sign a waiver about being in the park and protecting the park and treating it right. And it's like, that one was not supposed to be signed off by the university. That one was specifically for the people that were going into the park. We still verified and checked that it was agreeable. But that one was, for instance, like some kind of personal certification for the event that was happening, not the award. So they weren't putting the university at risk.
So when we talk about this collaboration, and in my thinking, we are cooperating across all of our interest groups. We all work for CSU and we work with each other to make all of these things happen. So what sponsored programs, for me, how we add value, we are tasked with fiduciary responsibilities and duty of care, as I've said. So we need to make sure that we are aware of any risk and that we're mitigating risk for the university and the investigators on the project. We want to make sure that what we proposed is what we got awarded and that they are consistent with our expectations of the award type, right? If we get a grant, I would not expect to see contract provisions in it, for example. So let's make sure we're getting the right thing for what we proposed. We are advocates for the PI and the university. I was struggling with how to phrase this, but we are here to help make the research and service that's part of our mission happen. So we do need to advocate for the projects, for the people. We're all on this team together. And we do facilitate internal processes because there are many different touch points that we have to consider when we are accepting an award and managing it. We also develop expertise over time and we can leverage prior experience. I can't say enough, even though things change, some things don't. And the more we know, the better we can do the job. So please help us all build our body of knowledge. And we do act as the authorized representatives throughout the life cycle. So even all the way through closeout, there are steps that OSP is responsible for and has to take to make sure that what we promised to do, we did, and we've done it successfully. And then I put on here too, we do distribute finalized documents to campus stakeholders. Again, our normal process is the PI and the FO, and we hope that it is getting to the right places. There isn't one place at CSU where we can put everything. So we have to work with each other to make sure that we're getting copies to the people who need to use it for ongoing award management.
Okay, now looking at the other side of that, the partnership with departments. As I mentioned, I used to be a DRA in my previous life. The departments have less of a heavy role in that risk factor that we're talking about at setup, but you still have a role. You are the front line of communication between awards management with faculty and research staff and OSP. You're bridging all those pieces together. as we've said before in other sessions, DRA is not necessarily your title. It's a role that you take on because you wear many hats, doing sometimes more financial, doing sometimes more admin. But thinking like these are all roles that work together. So how can we best support each other in making timely setup happen? We have KFS roles related to account management, such as fiscal officers, account managers, while at SOP, the FO is our primary point of contact for questions about anything that happens in KFS. That's Quality Financial System, and that's managed by Business Financial Systems, BFS. So those two things are going to work together as we transition into the next one. One of the things that the department is responsible for are these approvals, those compliance things that need to be in place for us to have setup happen. These are just 5 of our top areas in compliance. So we have the human subjects with IRB, we have animal subjects with IACUC. Our campus has biosafety, export, and conflict of interest. And conflict of interest needs to be reported on every award, so it's good to keep that annually up. We need some of these approvals in place before the award can be set up or finalized. An award might even call out that you cannot do, for instance, animal activity, since you haven't submitted your approval. So make sure that you have that sent to OSP and they've sent it to the sponsor, that all the things are ready to go. So making sure everything is done. We don't always need it for proposal, but we typically need it by the time award is set up. So keep those approvals, progress happening. If something's in progress, make it happen. Okay, we highlighted what were the added values of OSP. Now looking at the added value of the department, you have that close relationship, hearing the day-to-day from the team, from the PI, so you can best identify those issues, whether accounts need to be separated, if there's an outgoing sub that needs to be initiated or managed, what is the cost share information and how is that being handled and kept up with? Are there any other supporting documents that need to be submitted? So we have WIP on here, work in progress accounts, IDC splits, cost share, all those are needed for this setup period. This is a big one. If a budget comes in less than expected, it's never more than expected, right? But if a budget comes in cut than what was proposed, we need to figure it out. And so the department is the first one's notified to say, like, can we still do this? So is there a change in scope? We need to get that in documentation, that there's not a change in scope. We can still handle it even with the budget cut. Or we might have to go to the sponsor and say, we need to cut out this activity or this travel because you took a lot of money from our budget. So that's a big responsibility at setup on the departments, and that can cause a delay if we can't get a budget worked out. Ensuring regulatory, we already addressed on the last slide. So these are some things that are a heavy lift on departments at setup, but they make all the time in the world matter, right? So we can get to that account. This is just a quick mention slide. On our website, we have the life cycle of award tiles on the guidance page, and you can go into these 2 different boxes, award receipt and negotiation and account setup, for your homework today to see what are the different responsibilities, the responsibility matrix in there for OSP, for the department, for PI, and any other compliance or other teams that we work with. We have a quick recess, but I know that I have talked too much, so if there are any questions, please let us know right now. Stretch it out. You can do a lap around your house if that's how you like to spend your recess. Would post-award be the first to see a budget cut? Post-award is an interesting term there. Who are you talking about there? Anyone could be the first one to identify a budget cut, I guess. So if whoever sees the award first and is comparing the proposed budget to the award budget, they could, okay, so a financial officer person, we should see it before, the financial officer person could see it, but if OSP is the first ones to have it in hand, I would expect them to notice it. If the department is CC'd on the email and is reviewing it too, they may see it. Any thoughts, Chris?
I guess I would just say, I would say most of the situations where we see a difference in budget amounts is incoming. Like this new award comes in and it's less than we proposed. That would trigger a conversation about how do we allocate the budget that's less than we expected. When you say budget cut, like as a project continues over time, we might not get expected incremental funding, which would be a budget cut. the sponsor might communicate with either OSP or the PI, hey, we're not going to be able to fund this ongoing, right? So that would be a conversation you'd need to move over to OSP, because we need to have a more detailed talk about the award and its terms, about budget. Yeah, and Dwayne is saying, so again, if it comes to OSP and we see a discrepancy, that's the SRA, the Senior Research Administrator, or the Research Administrator. And again, to Liza's point, at what percentage reduction? It depends on the sponsor and the terms and conditions. Normally, when we see a 10% NIH cut because of a continuing resolution, we might not need a detailed rebudget. It would just be you have 10% less. If there are restrictions by line items, we would maybe need to do a new budget, because we would want to know how that kind of cut affects how we load budget to your account.
That was a good question, because we are going to go into award setup, like the actual account setup.
Okay, so after we've done our intake of the award and it's moved through negotiation and we've accepted it, then we need to set up the KR award record in our system. And KR award is the Quality Research Award module that is the system of record for award data. We set everything up there, and then we push information to KFS that's required for the account setup. And over time, as anything changes in the award or the account, we change those indicators in KR award and push that information to KFS. 5.3 accounts are not managed directly in terms of like contacts or budget or expiration date. Those are not managed directly in KFS. Those are KR award pushes to KFS. That's the one big takeaway I want you guys to know. If you have changes to those things for KR, or sorry, for 5.3 accounts, you need to contact your OSP team so that we can make those changes in the award module. We've got a slide here of common account types. What we're talking about today are 5.3 accounts, this restricted series concept. And 5.3 comes, I mean, it was in place when I started. We have multiple award series. If you go to the FPI, you can see all kinds of accounts that we use. 88 is a work in progress account for a sponsored program. If you have a non-sponsored, then you have an 89 work in progress. The other distinction I'd like to call out in this slide is that we do have gift funds that are managed through KFS, but OSP is not your management office for 6.4 funds. So that's a collaboration between advancement and foundation. And there's an activity, I think, yeah.
People filling this in on their worksheet, because there's some fill-ins.
Okay. Oh, this is a really dead slide. What we're trying to get to basically is the difference between getting paid as you go and being given a fixed amount up front that doesn't change. So grants, cooperative agreements are almost always, I always have to say, usually, almost, normally, and we don't get the money up front, right? That's another consideration. CSU has taken on the institutional responsibility to set up an account, and then you charge your expenses to it, and we submit a request for payment to our sponsor. We get reimbursed. Normally, there's some kind of not to exceed. So that's on that NIH award. We proposed a 5-year amount, and that's the expectation. We have that expectation. It may get cut over time by the sponsor, and they would tell us on an ongoing basis, this is how much you've got. You can't exceed this. So all of these robust systems that we use are set up to make sure that we are documenting expenses correctly, that we are making sure they meet the criteria: allowable, consistent, allocable. It's gone. The other cost principle, it's gone.
Reasonable.
Reasonable, thank you. Okay.
Treated consistently.
And so the tricky thing about cost reimbursable can be we put expenses on the account, we got reimbursed, and then it's like, oh, were those really supposed to be on there? No, so we send money back. Fixed price again comes in, this is how much we've got. We need to have a really well-defined scope and budget because there's not a lot of flex. So we might have to return funds, but generally what we try to do with a fixed price agreement is you told us it would cost this much. Sorry, you told us you gave this much to us. We thought it would cost this much. If it doesn't, we get to keep it. We would like that situation, but sometimes we can't negotiate that. So there are, again, in the world, constantly evolving, we do have situations where we are either getting or issuing a fixed price subaward, We might do this for, even though we got a grant, we might give a fixed price award to our subrecipient for certain situations. It's a more stable relationship. Sometimes we work with entities that don't have robust accounting processes, so we need to be more aware of the risk, and we would pay out on a schedule instead of cost reimbursable. Again, that's a work in progress. I think we just might be seeing in uniform guidance changes more flexibility in being able to do these fixed price subawards. It's a question that needs to be asked at the proposal stage. I will point that out if we're going to do that so that we can incorporate it into our proposal. That was really fast. Okay, getting paid. We have to figure out how we're getting paid. This should be called out in the award document. I will say some sponsors are better than others, and our biggest struggle is working with smaller entities, industry, or nonprofit that trying to figure out how we get paid can be challenging. We might send an invoice and they might pay on that basis. We might set up an automatic payment, the ACH process, where there's no paper check, but it's still kind of a draw or a request for money that we get and has to be processed in the financial system. We also have this drawdown concept. Federal agencies especially have payment management sites where we would log in and we would say, for this award, we are requesting this much reimbursement. And then that would be sent as an automatic payment. We do also have to work in for-profit portals like SAP Ariba, where our sponsor puts a purchase order in a system. We put an invoice in the system and we use that payment portal to make sure we get paid. That's very problematic because those portals can have their own restrictions. We can also get hybrid. We might get a check up front, and then we might have to send an invoice for the balance. But any award should include these terms. And if it doesn't, we need to call that out and try to get that information because that's really one of our pain points for award setup. And please note that sponsors do very often have requirements for reporting. We need a status report, a progress report before we'll give you money.
I think we're wrapping up. We have a quick pop quiz. Next one, Shannon. Okay, put in the chat. What mechanisms do you think are involved? This is recapping everything we learned today. We're in the home run, okay? Or in the home stretch? Home stretch, there we go. Basic research, DOE, involves CSU PI CAM overseeing the work of our campus and 3 other institutions tied to the scope. So what award types might be involved? Yeah, it could be anything in this situation, or a cooperative agreement, very likely, grant, likely, subawards, possibly. So you got all the options. You could even, no, it's basic research. It's probably not a contract, right?
And that's why I put that in there, right?
Yeah.
We don't want a contract for basic research because basic research should be undefined, building a body of knowledge, not a deliverable. That's why it was sneaky.
Yeah. Now, Shannon, next one. This is the one you do the poll for on your screen. CSUPI Dr. Knowles is committed to producing a specific amount of new geofiber material created in their lab for Lockheed Martin. What award type would you expect CSU to get? Now, while we have this set up as a right or wrong thing, you know, stuff could always happen and change. But typically with our relationship with Lockheed Martin and producing a specific thing here, we're going to expect it to be a contract.
Yep, and 94% of people said that, so.
Well, we have these last 2 things on here. Your hint for this one is get paid as we spend. What is it?
Okay, so.
What's the term? Cost reimbursable, that's it. Okay, next one, Shannon, bust it.
Oh, next one already. Ah.
Cost reimbursable, yeah, it's a hard word to spell. I didn't even give a hint. Allie got it fast. Yep, following all the rules. That's what was an overarching theme today, compliance. Thank you. Okay, yep. I have 3 pop questions for you all on the worksheet if you want to go do them later. And one of our online training.
And special thanks to our presenters today for sharing their expertise. On behalf of the OSP Training and Professional Development Committee, thank you for your participation in today's session.